Hello, my name is Kenneth, and today I'm going to talk about the causes of schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenia is a disease that is, when you get it, it changes your life. It changes your life completely. It's one of the most devastating diseases that that in all of humanity. Um, Approximately 1.5% of people worldwide get schizophrenia. Uh, it is true that schizophrenia changes your life. If your life was going one way, when you get schizophrenia, your life will be drastically different. And I'm going to talk about the causes of schizophrenia. What exactly is going on in the brain to cause this dreadful disease? Now, schizophrenia is characterized by symptoms, and these symptoms are divided into two types: positive and negative symptoms. The positives, they call them positive symptoms because these symptoms are added to your mental makeup, and they call the negative symptoms negative because they're symptoms that take away from your mental makeup. Like auditory hallucinations, hearing voices, those are positive symptoms because they're added to your mental makeup. Whereas withdrawal or isolativeness, that's a negative symptom, where because it's a quality of yourself that is taken away, where before you were outgoing and friendly. Now that you have schizophrenia, you like to be by yourself and you don't go out the house. Positive symptoms are auditory hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, olfactory hallucinations. Basically all the five senses. The most prominent one is auditory hallucinations. Another symptom of schizophrenia is this separation from reality. You see things that other people don't see, and in the worst cases, it's a total disconnect from reality. And you're in your own little world, and you're talking to people, and you have sometimes imaginary friends, imaginary enemies, and that's a positive symptom. Now, the negative symptoms are withdrawal, like I said before. There's something called avolition, or lack of free will. Your inability to do things that you used to do, that you used to enjoy, like if you like to ride a bike, you you feel that you don't want to ride a bike anymore once you get schizophrenia. Now, getting into the causes of schizophrenia, I want to first talk about this thing called the stress vulnerability model. I learned about the stress vulnerability model in a group session at a nursing home. And it's something that scientists have come up with to sort of describe exactly what's happening when a person gets schizophrenia. They're saying with the stress vulnerability model that the schizophrenic first has a vulnerability that he's developed in the past towards getting schizophrenia. And he's had this vulnerability all his life. And then there's a precipitating stress, like with some people that get schizophrenia who don't have it, initially, they go off to college. They go off to college, and the pressures of college starts you to have symptoms. Other people, it may be losing your virginity. You can lose your virginity, and if you have the vulnerability, you can get schizophrenia. And other people, it might be. I knew a woman in a psychiatric ward who had an abortion and got schizophrenia. She said that there was something inside her that was doing things to everybody inside the unit. That was her perception. That was her delusion. With me, it was the pressures of working in the Air Force that precipitated my schizophrenia. I've had schizophrenia for approximately 26 years, ever since 1985. Now, more about the causes of schizophrenia. There are two main avenues of getting schizophrenia. There's the first one is genetic. You can have a genetic predisposition to getting schizophrenia. If one parent, I've heard it said, this may not be accurate, I've heard it said if one parent has schizophrenia, the child has a 30% chance of getting schizophrenia. If two parents, if both the mother and the father have schizophrenia, then the chance of the child getting schizophrenia is 50%. Now, I've heard other numbers, but these are the numbers that I heard in a group session as well. But those numbers are quite high, and it makes me think about having children, whether I'm going to put my child through the same thing. And schizophrenia causes genetic changes. Once you get schizophrenia, it causes genetic changes in your genome that cause your offspring to get schizophrenia, as I said before. Another cause of schizophrenia is a rather unpleasant subject, childhood trauma or childhood physical or sexual abuse. Now, I've known, being in the mental health system for 20, 25 years, I've run into people who have been sexually abused by biological father, stepfather, uncle, adopted father. And they ended up with bipolar or schizoaffective or schizophrenia or PTSD and a host of other psychiatric ailments that I don't even know. It's a very sad story. And this is one of the causes of schizophrenia. sexual abuse. Now there's a third cause that is not really talked about, and it has to do with a personal experience of mine as a child. Now, when I was growing up, I lived in a town, and I lived in a house that was actually built on a partial foundation. It had the house was partially built on earth and partly had a basement. And under the partial the earth foundation, there was like a crawl space, and cats used to live under there. And also in that house, we had next door neighbors who I was friends with, and we used to play, out there. And the cats would be all over the place and running around, and we'd play with the cats and stuff like that. Now, out of that situation, 3 schizophrenics, 3 people got schizophrenia. There was me, and there was 2 of my next door neighbors that lived in the house right next to us. Now my question is, do those cats have anything to do with that? Because that's sort of like a abnormal sample space. Usually, you might find, somebody with schizophrenia, in one house, and then maybe 3 miles away you might find another one. But in this case, we find 3 schizophrenics in the space of 2 houses set adjacent to each other. And what do those cats have to do with that? Now, I'm a cat lover, and I don't say that cats cause schizophrenia. But what about the fleas on the cats? Because these cats were wandering around. Some of them had disease, and they were dying, under the house. The cats were having kittens, and the kittens would die under the house, and no doubt there was an abundance of fleas. Because I've heard, one disease, bubonic plague, is actually caused by a bacteria on a flea on a rat. Now, what about a bacteria on a flea on a rat, on a cat? It's a possibility. You never know. That could have been one of the causes of me getting schizophrenia. And with 3 people having schizophrenia and being next door neighbors, that's like a anomaly. So it could be a microbe, along with sexual abuse, along with genetic factors. These could be 3 avenues where one could have gotten schizophrenia. The experts usually say that it's usually caused by some sort of stress in childhood. And usually there's a period of time where you're normal and you're happy. And then about when you're 18 to 24 to 26, with women, it's actually later. That's when you start getting your first full-blown symptoms. So there's a long wait time. There's a wait time of 10 years in between having the stressors that cause the disease and you getting the disease. And that's odd. Now, how are you going to find a bacteria that causes schizophrenia when there's such a long wait time? You know, that could be like an incubation period where the bacteria is just doing nothing or it's slowly progressing. And, you know, like with the flu, you get, you catch the disease within hours. Whereas with schizophrenia, you're waiting 10, 15 years between the stress and getting the disease. Now that makes things difficult. And now I'm going to talk about, you know, some of the treatments of schizophrenia. The main treatment of schizophrenia is medication. Medication, I'm on Invega, which is like a variation of Risperdal. And I'm doing rather well right now. For the past few years, ever since 2009, I've had moderate to minimal voices, and that could be attributed to remission of symptoms, you know, because I've had remissions before. So I'm just going to enjoy it while I have it. But as far as medicines are concerned, I haven't really responded to the medicines that well. I've been on many medications. From my first medication was Moban to this latest medication. In the initial time, I suffered greatly. Symptoms were severe, and I was taking these medications, and they didn't work very well. 70% of the people with schizophrenia respond well to medication. The other 30%, nobody knows what's going on. But I'm doing well right now, and I'm not complaining. Medication, they say medication works. Different medications work good with different people. It's always good to have a medication that doesn't have any side effects. The older medications have a tendency to have side effects. The newer medications, which they call atypical medications, have a tendency not to have as many side effects. One thing about the newer medications, you have they actually do work to some degree, because, you know, on the average, people are spending less time in the hospital. You know, people spend a week in the hospital nowadays. Well, whereas, you know, 20 years ago, you know, you were going to spend 3 months to 6 months or even longer in the hospital. Another way of treating schizophrenia is through therapy. Therapy, having a therapist or a caseworker is very helpful to the schizophrenic. You have someone to talk to. You have someone to problem solve for you. You know, you will have problems. You have someone to a sounding board to talk about what's going on in your life, whether it be family or employment or relationships. It's good to have someone to talk to. So a therapist or a caseworker is a definite asset to the schizophrenic. Now, you know, as far as treatments of schizophrenia, you know, you can still talk about spiritual treatment, but people have a tendency to shy away from spiritual treatment. I myself have been exercised. It hasn't improved my situation. I was exercised way back in 1996, and I had severe symptoms for a long time. I think the main thing that has improved my symptoms is getting older. Because as you get older, it is. I've heard people say that the positive symptoms have a tendency to decrease. The negative symptoms stay, but the positive symptoms. So you start hearing less voices as you get older. At least some people do. I may be having a remission, but it may be that since I'm getting older, I'm hearing less voices. Now, future research. In the past, you had the spiritual approach to schizophrenia, the casting out demons and everything. We're tending to go away from that sort of approach. It was the same approach used with all medications. But now we have modern medicine. We have medicines where you take pills, like there's pills for diabetes. You don't have to quote unquote cast out the demon of diabetes. You take a pill and you get better. You take your insulin shot and you're healthier. And the same thing with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is one of those diseases that have a long way to go, but they're developing tools to look into the brain, because you just can't cut open the brain and look into it like you can cut open a liver and look into it. You need sophisticated tools to look into the brain. And now we have the CAT scan, we have the MRI, we have the positron emission tomography. And I could think of a new tool that can help look into the brain. How about looking at the neurons firing, in real time? How would you do that? Because, in the brain, the neurons fire about 1 billion times a second. Now, you need some extremely fast electronics to track 1 billion neurons fired a second. That's gigabyte. Not a megabyte, not a kilobyte, a gigabyte of information coming. And, when a neuron fires, there's actually what's called the action potential. This is a potential which is electrochemical signal that flows in the brain. Now, with the electrochemical signal, there's an associated electromagnetic pulse that flows outward into space. So every time each of these neurons fire, there is an electromagnetic pulse associated with that neuron firing, and it flows outside the head, radiating outward, onward, forever. Now, why not? Why can't scientists detect these pulses? You can have an array of antennas around the head and look for these pulses. They last about a tenth of a millisecond, so they should have like a frequency in the range of 1,000 kilohertz to 10,000 kilohertz. So you can have antennas up there that measure these pulses coming out of the brain. All you need is the appropriate shielding. You just put yourself in a screened box. And of course, the head has to be still. And apparently, I can see where you can get spatial and temporal data on these neurons firing in the brain, and this could help you also. This could help other diseases of the mind too. It's just an idea. I wonder if anybody's thought of it. Now, what exactly is going on in the brain of the schizophrenic? Now, 70% of the people with schizophrenia don't respond to medication. You know, they get frustrated by medication. I've gotten frustrated with medication. So what's going on in the brain? You know, schizophrenics have hallucinations, auditory, all the senses. And they have an altered sense of reality. They don't see the world the way other people see it. They get paranoid. They have delusions. You know, what's going on in the brain? What I think is going on in the brain is there's problems with blood flow due to changes in the brain. Because one thing that happens with a lot of schizophrenics is something called the ventricles, which is these fluid-filled organs deep inside the brain. They become enlarged. They become much larger than their normal size. And there's other changes in the brain that you really can't see on a CAT scan or MRI. And I think this changes the blood flow inside the brain. And it reduces blood flow in some regions and increases blood flow in other regions. And this may be a direct cause of your symptoms. Because if you reduce blood flow to certain regions of the brain, that means neurons are not getting the necessary oxygen and nutrients that they need. And when they don't get those oxygens and nutrients, they fall in performance. They don't fire like they normally fire. Now, with neurons, with lots and lots of neurons not firing the way they normally fire, then your thought patterns are going to change. Your sense of reality is going to change. You're going to start seeing things. The same thing happens when you go to sleep and you dream. You know, the heart, when you sleep, your heart starts pumping slower. Less oxygen goes to the brain. And the less blood goes to the neurons, and the neuron performance capabilities drop. And this changes the firing patterns of the brain. It changes your thoughts, and you start dreaming. You start having a different reality. You start seeing a different things than the normal reality. That's why I say a schizophrenic is actually dreaming while awake, because of this drop in neuron performance due to the lack of blood flow. Now, one can see where neurons dropping in performance could cause this chemical imbalance that is a commonly talk about as the cause of schizophrenia. I think it's the drop in performance that causes the chemical imbalance, and not the chemical imbalance that causes schizophrenia. So it's the other way around. So what can you do about it? I don't know. Maybe you can dilate the blood vessels. I think to some degree that was tried back in the 40s with insulin therapy. And, high doses of insulin dilate the blood vessels, and I've heard of a case where after a large injection of insulin, a patient was feeling normal and was talking and everything for a few hours, and then after a few hours he went into convulsions. And it's a very dangerous process, injecting people with insulin, going into convulsions, and you have to have medical supervision at all times while you do that, because it's very dangerous, and there's memory loss. But dilating, and I think the cause of why these treatments were tried, they didn't know why they worked, but I think it was due to the dilation of the blood vessels, and so that more blood could flow to the neurons, and the neurons snap back into their normal state of performance, and you got back into a state of reality. Now, that's all I wanted to talk about. It's about in regard to schizophrenia. I hope you learned something, and if you learned something, comment and make your own video and talk about your experiences with schizophrenia. Thank you very much.